Evening, colleagues. My name is Kadir Mir. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and the Registrar here at SOAS, University of London. It's my pleasure to welcome colleagues in the room and online to this event tonight. An event that we're really proud and pleased to be hosting. Myself, Adam Habib, our Professor Adam Habib, our Director, Ruqayya Bauer, our Chief Librarian, are all very keen to make sure that we remind ourselves and our friends and our family across the world that SOAS is a public good, a public resource, not just here in Bloomsbury, but across the globe, especially obviously within the regions of our interest, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. So we're really proud and really pleased to be able to host tonight's event. And obviously to do that in partnership with our friends at the University of Free State and Russell. And so without further ado, I'll hand over to Russell and hope you have a fantastic and interesting and engaging evening. To you, Russell.
Thank you. Thank you, Kadir, and thank you for that very warm welcome. I firstly want to just apologize for the absence of our Vice-Chancellor of the University of the Free State, Professor Francis Petersen, who would have been here, but unfortunately for circumstances beyond his control and our control, he's had to go back to South Africa. So I'm not Francis Petersen. Just want to make that clear. For one, he has less hair than what I have, if that's possible. So what we're doing here, and we're really pleased that SOAS has offered this beautiful space, wonderful space. Those of you who are online, I hope the cameras will actually show you some of the space, so you can also appreciate it virtually. So we want to thank SOAS for hosting us, to have it here. And also I want to acknowledge the South African Chamber of Commerce UK. South African Chamber is a partner. We have an affiliation with the South African Chamber UK, and we've been partnering with the South African Chamber of Commerce on these global dialogue conversations for 2 years now. And the global dialogue conversations is something that the University of the Free State, the reason that we actually host these events is to showcase to our alumni and also to a broader audience the role and impact that the University of the Free State is having through its teaching, through its research, the impact that it's having on the lives of our students. And one of the things that we really want to impart to our students, and that we also want our alumni to be aware of, is that we want the University of the Free State to be not just a South African or an African university. Certainly that is what we are, but that we also have a global footprint. And so these conversations they're really aimed at seeing the University of the Free State graduates as global citizens, and we try to have topics that are quite engaging and that are challenging and quite courageous conversations. And we've had the privilege of hosting people like Lord Peter Hain, and some of you will be familiar with the work that he did in the past on the anti-apartheid struggle, but more importantly, the work that he has been doing subsequently, looking at what was happening in South Africa, particularly around the corruption, the illicit money flows, and the accountability or culpability, really, of those involved in what we call state capture. The Vice-Chancellors also had conversations with Patrick Soon-Shieng. Some of you will know him as a leading medical figure, a medical doctor, but has now become a big philanthropist and is quite involved in drug development and drug discovery, and has invested significant resources in South Africa, his place of birth. This evening, we're really excited to have a conversation again on a topic that has always been and probably will always remain challenging, controversial, contentious. So we're pleased to have our guest speaker, as it were, Rohitesh Dhawan, but he likes to be called Ro. I think it's from Winnie the Pooh, maybe, right? So we have Ro, but he's definitely a force of nature. Rohitesh has a background in sustainability, and he has studied, interestingly enough, in South Africa as well. So there's a nice connection. He's a rodent. That's what alumni from the University of Rhodes University are affectionately known as. And he is the president and also the CEO of the International Council of Minerals and Mining. And then we are pleased to have Chantell Ilbury with us, who will be in conversation with Rohitesh. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Chantell. She has a very illustrious CV, a CV both of the past and of the future. Chantell is known for her work in scenario planning. She's considered one of the leading futurists in many ways, is known for the work that she has done on her own, and also the work that she's done with Clem Santner. Between the two of them, popularized foxes, to think like a fox. I think that's one of the things that they've, and she'll explain to you the sort of significance of that. Also hails from South Africa originally, so we're really pleased. Although Rohitesh himself, although he studied in South Africa, is from India originally, so it's great to have this kind of global sort of connection. So I'm going to hand it over to Chantell, and she will sort of set the scene for this sort of conversation, and she and Rohitesh will have the conversation for 30 to maybe 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. So again, thanks everyone, and looking forward to a really engaging conversation.
Thank you for that introduction. And I think you said that the mining sector is divisive and controversial. And but if you think about the mining sector, the world would not go round unless we had minerals and metals. It is part of all of our lives, past, present, and certainly into the future. So I think the conversation this evening would be looking at and discussing some of the legacy of the past around mining and what the future of mining would look like. So I'm very excited, thank you, to be in conversation with you. And my very first question is, what is the ICMM, and why has it formed in terms of the mining sector? If you could just give us a brief background.
Thanks, Chantell. Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here, but I also have a confession to make. There's nothing like a hallowed institution like SOAS to really make you well up with the imposter syndrome that I feel at the best of times. And so here I am with people that know far more than me and are more analytical. And I'm thinking, what could I possibly tell you that will be interesting and insightful? So what I can promise you is to be totally honest and candid with you, even if some of the issues we discussed tonight are a little bit difficult and sensitive. I promise you full candor at all times. So Chantell, ICMM is a very unique organization because there is nothing like it in a sector other than mining. You could possibly think of us as a industry group. People might think that we might represent the industry's commercial interests, but actually we don't. It was set up about 20 years ago with an explicit mandate not to lobby for the industry on commercial issues, but instead to be a force of change from within the industry to raise the standards of our performance. Now, let's be clear, it wasn't because this was a bunch of nice guys and it was only guys that got around a table and said, doesn't the world need this? Because there's a clear commercial imperative here too, because if the reputation and image of mining improves because we perform better, that will show up in better access to talent, to investors, to permits, to local community support. So that's the outcome. But the pathway to it isn't to shout from the rooftops about how great we are. And it's not even to say to people, you really need us, although that's very true, as you said, Chantell. It's to demonstrate that we're willing to put our competitive instincts aside to work for the common good, where the industry benefits, but the world benefits as well. So today it has 25 companies that represent 1/3 of the global mining industry. Between us, we have 650 sites in over 50 countries. So it's a very substantial grouping of the largest players that people will know about. From a South African context, some of our iconic mining companies, including, say, Anglo American, probably the best known for people, are absolutely part of the group, represented by their CEOs. So that's the other unique thing, is that our board is made up of the CEOs of the mining companies. And I promised you, Chantell, a slightly uncomfortable fact I would reveal about our board, but I must tell you because it gives us a window into the industry. Of the 25 people sitting around that table when we meet, there are more people called Mark than women. Actually, let me correct that. Till last year, there were more people called Mark than women. That's changed because one of the Marks left.
Oh my goodness. Replaced by?
Another bloke. And we'll get to this in a minute, Chantell, because one of the things we'll talk about is trust in mining. And if somebody was to take a picture of our board and post it on social media, would somebody look at that and say, that's an industry I can trust? Now, this is really not to pontificate or to finger wag. It's just to recognize the reality that we, like other sectors, but particularly us, we have done a terrible job of creating an environment in which people from all walks of life can succeed. And you can see that in the top table.
It's an interesting one because gender, is really one of the top global issues. And it is a sector that I suppose people would initially have said, well, mining is a very male orientated. How do you, address that? But we have seen some CEOs of some of your top companies being females too. I wanted to just ask, and it was something you mentioned, Anglo American, one of your members, and Duncan Wanblatt, I was listening to a few months ago, who actually said mining into the future is going to grow rather than be in decline. So my question to you is mining a sunset industry overall, or do you think it is a sunrise industry? And if it is a sunrise, where's it going? What are the key sexy metals and minerals in the future?
Great question, Chantell. Look, it isn't, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you what I'm about to tell you. Nobody alive has ever experienced a growth in mining of the type and scale we are likely to see in the next 30 years. Nobody alive has seen it. And that's because mining has to grow somewhere between doubling to 20 times, depending on the commodity. And there's a simple reason for that. We need to transition our economies from one that is based on fossil fuels to one that is based on renewable energy and electrified technology. Anything green, anything electric takes a lot more metal and mineral input than the same thing if it was produced by fossil fuels. So just the examples to prove it. If you shut down a gas-fired power plant and you put a wind turbine in its place, you automatically consume 9 times more copper, let alone the steel, let alone everything else, just by doing that. And if you said, I'm done with my petrol or diesel car because I want to contribute to a cleaner planet, I'm going to buy an electric vehicle if you can afford it, you have automatically increased your consumption of copper once again by about 4 times. You've increased your consumption of lithium, of cobalt, of graphite, and all these other metals that go into technologies of the future. But the demand growth that I said is coming is not only because of the energy transition, although that is the acute or the thing that is driving it at a kind of key level. It also comes from the baseline of demand there's always been for metals and minerals, which will continue to grow as the population grows from 7 billion to 9 billion. So this energy transition demand is coming on top of a baseline demand, but it is so significant that it will lead to a growth in mining, as I say, of the sort we have almost never seen before. Let me just riff off what Duncan said from Anglo. Anglo recently opened a major copper mine in Peru called Quellaveco. And it took them, depending on how far you go back, probably in the region of 20 years to develop it from first finding it. We will need 60 to 80 Quellavecos in the next 20 years. So if we're going to build all these mines, we have to start now. But the challenge, of course, is one, that it takes this long to develop these mines. The second, that the fact that we need mining is not a license, let alone a social license to mine. Because, and I know you'll ask me about this later, Chantell, we do not have a particularly good reputation in many parts of the world. And so when we ask for the support and permission of communities about whether we can open new mines, the answer won't be an automatic yes. We're going to have to earn that. How we earn that and get enough people to be attracted to work in the mining industry and get enough investors to give us their capital and get support from governments and do it quicker than we've ever done it before is the challenge.
Well, that actually sounds like it should be a foxy industry, and I can guarantee it's not a foxy industry to date. So agility and adaptability clearly are going to be keywords in the mining sector, even though, as you said, it's a long-term process, 20 years to explore, find, build, and then produce into the marketplace. Just picking up on that too, you talked about communities and the ability to develop a mine within communities and their voice becoming a lot stronger. It's also, I suppose, about where those minerals are, in which countries, and the geopolitics that actually now will also come into play in terms of developing for the global market.
Absolutely. Look, the basic fact to say, which I think many will know, but it's worth explicitly stating it. Although I described our demand for these commodities going through the roof, there is no shortage of any key mineral in the ground. We have enough of the stuff in the ground. Our challenge is, can we get it out quickly enough, safely enough, responsibly enough? That's the basic fact. So nobody should worry we're going to run out of lithium, or we're going to run out of cobalt, or we're not. There's more than enough of it in the ground. Then the question becomes, where are we going to produce it and how? Now here, it's worth thinking this way. Around the world today, as we sit here, there are somewhere in the region of 5,000 mines being developed at various stages. Some are very, very early exploration, some of them are in construction, but it's a wide range, 5,000. Of those 5,000 mines, half are on or close to the lands of indigenous people. And our sector's relationship with indigenous people has not always been very healthy. In fact, in many cases, it's been pretty bad. And people have suffered as a result of bad mining practices in the past. Not saying that's the way everything is, plenty of good examples today, but we have to recognize the legacy that we live with. Now, when you add, in addition to them being on or close to indigenous lands, either one of food insecurity, water stress, or conflict, that number goes up to 2/3. So 2/3 of the mines being built to supply the energy transition minerals of the future are on or close to indigenous land and have one of water stress, food insecurity, or conflict. I'm telling you this because this is the frame in which we operate before we even think about geopolitics. Now let's add on to that the geopolitics. Now the geopolitics are such that there is a dominance of one country in both the production of minerals and the processing of those minerals into key metals, and that country is China. China controls, for the top 5 commodities that we use, they are the key player in either the production or the processing in some cases both, of each of the top 5. So there is a dominant player in town, which is China. Objectively, before you bring in geopolitics, that's not necessarily a problem. But when you now consider the relationship between China and the West, and you consider the countries that are trying to balance themselves, like South Africa, in fact, all of Africa between China and the West, you can see how it gets very complicated very quickly. There are efforts underway from the West to also provide mineral-rich countries with an alternative development partner besides China. An example of this is called the Mineral Security Partnership. That's a group of 14 countries that are getting together to promote responsible mining. China's not part of that, of course, because China is the alternative to that sort of model of development. But we also need to recognize that there are parts of the world that are both rich in minerals and have conditions in place to stimulate the growth of a mineral economy, but you may not have thought of them as mineral superpowers. Let me give you one example. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia wants to be the Saudi Arabia of minerals, just like Saudi Arabia is the Saudi Arabia of oil and gas. They have both the resources, they have the money, they have the political will. Minerals are one of the 3 key pillars of Vision 2030 for the Saudi economy. And they are a major player in mining. And that's happened in the last 5 years, essentially. And I suspect that we will see more and more of these countries emerging that we wouldn't have thought about previously as mineral players, which includes, Chantell, mining happening closer to home in Western countries that are used to not having mining closer to home. That is something we are going to have to get used to, because if you want security of supply, you want to play the geopolitics well, and if you want high standards, then you cannot outsource all your mineral production elsewhere. And because I said that there's no shortage of metals and minerals in the ground, there's no real excuse to not build mines, even in parts of the world where they consume them. Just one final example is the US is nowhere when it comes to production of lithium globally, nowhere. It's less than 1% of global production. Yet it holds a top 5 resource base in lithium. It has one of the top 5 largest resources in lithium, but try open a new mine in the US.
You see, it's the country's regulations, the perceptions of mining, trust deficit, I think, in terms of mining in the past and what it could be into the future. But just coming back to that, then coming back to the ICMM, the nature of your members, are they, and I think having had a look at some of your members, a bit of a Western club in terms of their view around mining and the type of safety and sustainability in mining going forward versus, as you say, China, India, and some of the other players coming onto the field?
I can't deny that. As I said, we're a third of the industry, but our members are very much from the Anglo-Saxon world. We have one company that is Chinese owned, that is MMG. We do not have an Indian company in the group. That means China and India really aren't represented. Until a couple of years, until Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we had a Russian member, but they have since left after that period. So China, India, and Russia are 3 of the largest mining jurisdictions in the world, and they are not represented at the top table of the global mining industry. That's a problem, and it's not ideal. But it's not an easy problem to solve, because to become a member of our group, there are some very clear but high barriers that companies have to cross. And those that are in the group have crossed those barriers. For example, no ICMM member mines in a World Heritage Site. ICMM members are committed to principles of transparency like the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative. We respect the UN guiding principles on security and human rights, and so on and so on. So companies have to demonstrate that they are either already doing it or willing to do that. And I guess it's telling on its own that there's a large portion of the industry that today does not subscribe to these principles. So is it any wonder then, Chantell, that people have concerns about how this industry will operate in the future? Because if I'm talking about scaling the industry 20 times for some commodities, some are looking at that and saying, wow, that's awesome. What a great opportunity. But let's also recognize that there are many people that are going to be sitting in fear with that thought, thinking that means 20 times the amount of the bad stuff that I've seen happen from the mining industry in the past.
So coming a little bit more to South Africa and the mining sector, because, you know, our economy was built on mining and resource-based economy, which is perhaps shifting. A couple of questions around the mining sector and the South African context in particular. And one of the big things is about beneficiation in terms of minerals. It's extracted, it's taken somewhere else, value add, and then returned to us. And so I think perhaps even more from a political perspective, beneficiation is a key concept in terms of growth. What is your view on that?
This is probably going to get me into trouble, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is that beneficiation is a possible route to ensure that the citizens of countries in which minerals are extracted get maximum benefit from it. It is politically a very easy and convenient route to pursue and ask others to pursue. But in many cases, it is not the most effective route or the most plausible. And in South Africa's case, the hurdles for beneficiation are very high. So let me explain what I mean. To beneficiate something you have mined into something that's closer to the end product that people are willing to pay for means you're adding value in that process. And by adding value, people in that country can benefit from that value. That's a strong case. But what do you need to beneficiate? What are the key ingredients? The key ingredients tend to be cheap and reliable power. Need I say more?
Continue.
An efficient and working logistics system.
Well, continue. We've put another tick.
And essentially safety of tenure, because you're making a strong and lasting commitment to beneficiation. And there are some plants in South Africa that are currently beneficiating. Look at the Hillside smelter in Richards Bay. But if anybody has followed what has happened around Hillside for the last 2 or 3 years, if you looked at that, it would scare even the most ardent South African supporters and make them think twice about whether they can actually invest in beneficiation in the country. So I'm saying all of this, Chantell, not to say that beneficiation is not the answer for South Africa, or it cannot be, but we have a lot of work to do if the country is going to be attractive for people to invest in beneficiation. And if we don't think we can get there, then let's pursue other avenues where South Africans can benefit from the minerals that rightly belong to them. And that's a core principle that everybody should agree on, that minerals belong to the citizens of the countries in which they're mined, and they must benefit from them. And so instead, perhaps, of a pipe dream to expand beneficiation in South Africa, let's make the production of minerals as attractive as possible. We are utilizing such a small portion of South Africa's natural mineral endowment. Why not build on that infrastructure we've already built and create an environment where people want to come and open new mines? That, in many ways, will be more job creating than beneficiation. I don't have the numbers to back this up, but intuitively, I can tell you that that makes sense to me. When you beneficiate, when you set up a steel mill, you're investing a lot of money into the machinery, and you're investing a lot of money into a few highly skilled people. In a country where 70% of young people don't have a job, where unemployment rate is through the roof, our priority must be to create the maximum number of decent jobs possible. Beneficiation will not create a huge number of jobs, but primary extraction can create significant numbers of jobs. And so before we think about beneficiation, or alongside thinking about beneficiation, let's not forget where it all starts and where South Africa's competitive advantage lies, which is on the extraction side.
And just to follow on from that, just, thinking about beneficiation, the other key mining globally, challenge is mechanization. And I think if you have a look at the South African context, we've got deep mines, and mechanization is probably the way one would naturally take the sector, but therein lie some ethical dilemmas. And what is your view on that?
Yeah, so look, there is an opportunity today with available technology to take people out of a number of mining jobs that they needed to do before. An example will be a rock drill operator that doesn't now need to be literally at the face holding the rock drill to try and extract the ore. That can be done by a machine. You no longer need a driver for a mining truck. The truck can be driven autonomously from a control center hundreds of kilometers away. These are the kinds of jobs that can now be replaced by automation, and many of the new generation mines being built around the world apply this methodology of mechanization. Why? Well, let's again be honest with each other. A lot of it has to do with profitability and commerciality. Often mechanized operations are more productive. You know, mines run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're always running. People get fatigued, people get sick. Sometimes you don't have somebody coming to work. That can all affect your production. Machines tend not to have the same issues. And so, yes, commercial decisions are at the front and center of this, but equally, a very important consideration for mechanization globally and in South Africa is safety. Now, because we have very deep underground mines in South Africa, particularly gold mines, you have a particular challenge, which in the industry you would call fall of ground, which basically means that as you're mining, the ground above you collapses. That is the number one or two cause, depending on the year, of people getting hurt and dying in mining in South Africa. The other cause, by the way, is an interaction with a vehicle, which are huge vehicles. And so vehicles and fall of ground are the two reasons people get hurt or die in South African mines, and that tends to happen globally as well. By mechanizing, you're taking people out of those situations where they can get hurt, and you're creating a much safer environment. And our first duty as a responsible industry is to keep people safe and make sure everybody goes home at the end of the day. But you know what? I really am glad that I'm not in the seat of CEOs of South African deep gold mines or any South African mine where you're having to choose between mechanize the mine, make it safer, make it more productive, but probably put thousands of people out of jobs, or keep people in jobs, and they're not going to get other jobs if you take this job away from them, but continue to take a higher than acceptable risk of people getting hurt or dying. How do you make that choice? I mean, it's an extraordinarily difficult choice that the industry has to make.
And I think made worse in the South African context because of our drivers of job creation and job protection. Just one last question on the South African context too is platinum. Platinum is a mineral, and platinum group metals into the future, I definitely think have got a big play in the future. And, platinum is predominantly found between Zimbabwe and South Africa, I think 70% of the platinum. Yet in South Africa, it is a declining sector of mining. Why is that?
Well, let me do something that's very foolish, which is to possibly challenge a futurist about the future of anything.
Oh.
And in this case, I would say that the future of platinum is still uncertain, because a lot of platinum goes into catalytic converters. Catalytic converters are used in internal combustion engine cars. So there's a big debate right now about, are electric vehicles going to exceed our expectations of how quickly people will buy them, in which case platinum demand will be lower than what we think. Or there's a different school of thought that says, actually, electric vehicles will be slower in their uptake than what we thought. So there's a brighter future for platinum group metals than what you think you had in the past. So there's genuinely, I don't know what the answer is, but there is two scenarios to your skills. And so I'm not even going to pretend like I know the way to think about it, but it's just to recognize that platinum producers cannot take their future market for granted in the same way as copper producers can, or lithium, or others probably have more certainty that their demand is definitely going up. Platinum, not sure. But on the supply side, Chantell, why has South African platinum production, or the kind of environment around platinum, not grown or is stagnating, maybe even falling? It's because of the three things I said are essential to any sustained mining investment remaining there, which are unfortunately not there in South Africa. Power, logistics, safety. It really comes down to that basic. If you can ensure clean, reliable, cheap power, if you can ensure that your logistics system works so you can get the stuff out from the mine to the port and get paid for it, and if you can ensure that your people and assets are safe, people will invest when the resource base is as rich as it is in South Africa. Unfortunately, on all three criteria, we're not competitive. That's the reason why.
Let's take some questions here for either Chantell or for Rohitesh? Anybody? Anyone? Okay. One of our own, an alum.
Thank you for this conversation. I think I've already learned a bit more than I've already known. So thank you. Very interesting conversation. For me, myself, knowing everything about mining, that's not my forte. I'm in a different sector. So what I know about mining is what I see in the news. And my question just to you is, I've heard about all the possibility, all the opportunity that mining still has for the world, and especially for South Africa, where people could potentially create jobs. But how does the mining sector go about changing perceptions about the mining industry in itself, where you live in a world today where every second news article is about climate change and people protesting to see like a greener world, a more sustainable world? So what's the mining sector's strategy to not combat that, but also to put the positive of what the mining sector can bring to the world still, to also put that in the public narrative?
Adrian?
Thanks, Russell. I wanted to ask how the mining industry sees addressing its legacy of pollution. For example, acid mine drainage just in Johannesburg, and the whole situation around Zama miners mining the gold mines and those sorts of issues.
Thank you. And Alex. Hi, Alex.
Hey, thank you for everything so far that you said. That was super interesting. From the environmental perspective as well, in terms of those increases that you spoke of, do you know how much land that equates to, and therefore the sort of environmental cost that would be, and how does the mining sector deal with, deal with that effectively?
Okay, we'll take those three, and then we'll take another round. Okay, so you can work out between the two of you who wants to tackle what.
Perfect. Look, maybe starting with the last one, it's a great question, and this might really surprise you, and I had to triple check that I didn't read this wrong. If you take the entire footprint of every mine in the world and all the infrastructure associated with that mining in the world, it covers less than 0.1% of the Earth's surface. Less than 0.1% of the Earth's surface is directly impacted by mining activity. It is minuscule, tiny. But we think of it as a lot more because of the visceral image of this great big hole in the ground, right? It just, our head doesn't compute that actually it's very small. To put that into perspective, about 40% of the world's Earth, or 40 to 50, has been affected by farming. So if you take farming, it's nearly half the world's land. Mining is 0.1%. Now, again, that's not an excuse to just do mining as we want it. It's just to recognize that the footprint isn't, I think, the big issue. The big issue is that sometimes that footprint can occur in very sensitive parts of the world. So even though you're having a small impact, it could have a huge impact on species, ecosystems. And there, I think the answer lies in a couple of things. One is, let's agree that there are parts of the world we will not touch. We will not mine in, no matter how rich the resource, how important the resource. So far, we have a commitment to not do that in World Heritage Sites and to protect all other legally, or to respect all other legally protected areas. Unfortunately, it remains legal to mine in World Heritage Sites. And I actively campaign governments to make it illegal to mine there, because it doesn't help if our companies aren't mining there, but others are. That would actually make it worse. So I think from a pure footprint point of view, it's not really the issue. But the issue is, can we make sure that we're not mining in places where the risks are too great for us to take that risk? And to make sure that where we are mining, we are rehabilitating that land to as close as possible to what it was before we started mining. And this is possible. I've just returned from Brazil with Sarah, and we went to see one of the largest mining operations there for bauxite. Bauxite is used to make aluminium. And we went to see both, this is in the Amazon, parts of the Amazon that had never been touched by mining, and it's lush and green and beautiful and lots of animals and insects. And then you went to parts of the forest that were regrowth forests from where mining had happened, but had been rehabilitated. They looked exactly the same. They looked exactly the same. You couldn't tell the difference between land that's been rehabilitated and land that had never been touched. A scientist probably could. I'm not saying they were exactly the same ecosystem services, but actually they found that many of the same species and some more species have returned back to the land. Again, that is probably the exception rather than the rule. but it shows you that you can do it well and make sure that it can be, that nature can thrive and recover even on land that we've mined. So that's my thought on that. And then, Adrian, on your question of legacy of mining, this is a very difficult, sensitive, but important question that we have to address. Why? Because our legacy is not great. That's the reality, and let's just accept that. So in parts of the world, like in Australia, there are something like 200,000 abandoned mines in Australia alone. I don't have the numbers for South Africa, but I can imagine a similarly scary number in the United States. In addition to that legacy, the legacy of mining is tied to the legacy of colonialism. We cannot deny that either. A lot of Latin American mining comes out of colonial legacy. The relationship with indigenous peoples also has to do with legacy. And so I think we can't just look forward and say to people, we're going to be super responsible in the past and expect people to believe us when we haven't dealt with the challenges of the past. And here, now I'm really going to get myself into trouble. I think what's necessary is some form of a truth and reconciliation process for the mining industry. And South Africans understand both the upsides and the downsides of doing that. But I struggle to see a scenario in which we move forward without some reckoning of the past and some ability to say sorry and draw a line and promise to be better. I think that's what's going to be needed. Maybe just the last one, and then Adrian, you may want to come back on that, just on how do we counter the perceptions around mining. Let me answer it in the negative by saying, how do we not do it? Because I sometimes get pressured to do it this way, but I refuse to, is to run a PR campaign or an ad campaign telling people, you're wrong. You're wrong. You thought mining was bad. Mining's great. You didn't know how important we are. Let me tell you how important we are. You know what? I mean, there's a number of reasons why I think that's not the way to go. One of them is an insult to people. If people feel a certain way about mining, nobody wants to feel like they're an idiot for feeling the way they do. So a message that says to them, you are stupid for thinking that mining was bad, is just going to make people more angry. And I think it's an insult to the way people think. So I think the answer lies in showing up differently and actually sitting with the reasons people might think or believe that mining is an issue of concern, and to work with that rather than to tell them they're stupid. And it gets to another part of the culture of our industry. We tend to be very much focused on the head, whereas what people feel is shaped in the heart. So when people say, I'm worried about mining, or I have mistrust in mining, or I don't like mining, our typical answer is, but you need mining because without mining, you can't have electric cars. Oh man, I'm telling you something that's here and you're hitting me back here. No, you're hitting the wrong place. So I think it is showing up differently. It's saying sorry for the past. It's acknowledging our mistakes and letting people be curious themselves to find out more about mining. Nobody can change anybody's mind. Chantell, you can't change my mind. I can't change yours. Only you can change your own mind if you feel in a safe space, curious enough to want to explore a different mindset than what you came into the conversation with. And I think our biggest failing as an industry is we have not always demonstrated that kind of humility and that kind of ability to sit with what people feel.
And the illegal mining with that, Adrian addressed,
Zamazamas, which are the word for illegal miners. In South Africa, they're called garimpos. In Latin America. So here, again, let me first hit you with a statistic which really grounds us all in the reality of the situation. For every one person that works in the formal industrialized mining industry, 10 people work in artisanal and small-scale mining. That's the ratio. If you think the majority of mining employment is by the likes of the companies in the ICMM, it is not. And so you have an entire economy that is much bigger than the formal mining economy in terms of size of employment, that has both legal and illegal artisanal and small-scale mining. And there's a very important difference. You can have legal artisanal small-scale mining and you can have illegal artisanal small-scale mining. The illegal side is unequivocally something that isn't a good for anybody involved in that process, but it is the product of desperation. It is a product of desperation that people are going to turn to a situation where they're putting themselves and their health at risk to extract minerals because they see no alternative. On the legal side, that can be a powerful force of development and of positive development in places like the DRC. So let's be clear on the difference. On the illegal side, absolutely not condoning it, but appreciating where it comes from. And on the legal side, I think it is very important to continue to support it, develop it, because it's a source of employment that the big companies will never be able to do. Last thing, Adrian, just to explain to people why it is such a challenge in South Africa, particularly in the gold mines. When the gold mines were set up in the West Rand in particular in South Africa, all the shafts are connected. So today you could go down a Harmony shaft and come up a Goldfield shaft, right? And the reason was for safety. If one shaft collapsed, you'd have the ability to come out the other. But the problem today is that if illegal miners get in through one shaft, it is virtually impossible to be able to find, locate, and rescue them, because they're also connected. So that's why it becomes a complicated issue. Chantell?
Some comments on those questions, and then on to another question. Just to the perceptions of mining and how you get past it. I worked a couple of years ago with the coal mining industry. They have once a year, they get together, and I happened to bring a scenario up that I said coal might be the new tobacco. And they said, never, it's coal is required, it's going to be in the world for many, many years. And I think the concept of perception is to make the difference between thermal coal mining and metallurgical coal. Thermal coal goes into electricity, huge pollutant, will probably be in decline. I'm not too sure if you would agree with that. Metallurgical has to go into steel making. It brings the temperatures up with the iron ore to get to the temperature to produce steel. Now, a lot of people don't do that, know that. So perception is coal is terrible. It's got to be on the decline. So I suppose it's again to now nuance, its uses into the future and why it's used, and that relationship in terms of perception.
So there are a few great questions online, but I'll group these two, one from Vasu, one from Francis. So Vasu says, so if growth in mining is a future reality, as you said, and you have to measure this against the cost and environmental impact of it, what are our best options to balance this? And then Francis, similar question. If the world needs more metals than ever, why is the trust in the mining industry at its lowest?
Louise?
Hi, thank you for this. I feel so much better educated already, and I really appreciate your point around perceptions and linking the head and the heart. And we do a lot of work with Business for Good, and it's rare to hear a corporate speaking in that way. So thank you for that. How, you're talking about your members, and then and it's connected to the geopolitics question. How you as a group work with others, because you were saying, might be something that you promote, but if everyone else is not doing it, how do you manage that? And the second thing is, again, back to the trust deficit, young people. How are you engaging and thinking about working with young people to help them think differently about the mining for the future?
Okay, let's start with the online one first. So the first question was, how do we manage the environmental impacts and what's the best option? Best option, the cleanest metal is the one you don't have to mine. So let's be clear on maximizing the opportunity for recycling and reuse before we get to primary production. Even if we do that, we will still need primary production to grow many times. So I'm not saying the recycling will solve our problem, but we haven't talked about it. And I think it's really important to say that we as primary producers do not stand against the circular economy. We want it to happen because it's absolutely essential. Now, once that's happened, in terms of producing it, the key issues for us to focus on is to try and drive carbon out of the process. We can do that. We have the technologies largely to do it. To reduce the use of water and to recycle the amount of water we use. Once again, we have the opportunity to do that. And then to rehabilitate land to a very, very high standard. If we do those three things right, we tend to be able to manage the environmental impacts to a manageable level. And as my futurist friend might confirm, a very good way to think about this is that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So if people say, can this be done? I can point you to mines where it's already being done. We just have to make this the norm. The second online question, please remind. Why is demand high, trust low? Why is demand high and trust low? In one sentence, the situation we find ourselves is this. Never before has the world needed so much from an industry it has trusted so little. This is the situation we find ourselves in. There's plenty of places where there's low trust, but here you have very high need and low trust. Why is it? It's because we as an industry have not effectively engaged society in our past. That's true. We have either lived in obscurity where you didn't really have to think about mining until now, where you're now thinking about mining because of the energy transition. And so we've done nothing to help people understand mining, what we do, what the challenges are, what the opportunities are. And that's why mistrust tends to thrive in the absence of information and openness and transparency. And I'm not sure openness, transparency, and active engagement are things you would normally associate with the mining industry. That's why I think mistrust is low. And that's what I think we will need to do to fix it. So with young people, and Sarah is one of our younger people in the organization, it is first I will just say it's a challenge. So across the world, whether it's in Australia or Canada or the US, we're seeing declines of between 25 to 60% of the number of people enrolling in mining related degrees. What's going on? The world's demand for stuff is going up. We're saying mining is super important, and the number of people enrolling in mining is going down. I would say trust is at the center of that. If you don't trust this industry, you're not going to choose to work there, even though mining pays above other industries like for like in general. There's also a trend of higher urbanization in the last 5 to 10 years. So if you're living in a city, do you really want to go and live and work in a remote area where mines tend to be? That's another challenge possibly. But I think the best way we can make the industry attractive for young people to choose it is to demonstrate in a serious way, one, that the workplace they will enter into is inclusive and respectful and safe, particularly for women and other underrepresented groups. And number two, to demonstrate that if you are a botanist and you really want to have a huge impact on the world's plant species, there is probably no better place to work than in mining. If you are an anthropologist and you really care about people benefiting and keeping their cultures alive, there's no better place to work in than mining, and so on and so on. Mining offers the opportunity to do so much more than just be a mining engineer. And that's not something we've always shown people, and that's probably going to be the thing we have to do. On the rest of the industry, as I said, very quickly, on the rest of the industry, I'm not sure we will ever be able to directly affect the wider industry, although we try. That is the job, I think, primarily of investors who should be saying, I'm not going to invest in a company if you don't follow the same principles. Governments who are saying these principles should become law, and others who are part of the industry to say, we won't work with you unless you do the things that the leaders are doing. That's the way I think change will happen.
Thank you, Rohitesh, and thank you, Chantell, on behalf of the University of the Free State. We really appreciate you spending time with us. Thank you for those of you who tuned in online, those of our alumni. I mean, this is something that the University of the Free State really prides itself on. It's a part of our vision for going into the future, our Vision 130. Obviously coincides with some of the long-term vision when it comes to mining. And I think it has opened our eyes to many of these sort of issues and new insights and a new understanding. And that's really the purpose of these global dialogues and these conversations. So again, on behalf of our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Francis Petersen, who again, unfortunately couldn't be with us, really appreciates your participation. The Sharon Constantian also was also not with us, but we do have representatives from the South African Chamber of Commerce to thank SOAS again for and the director or Vice-Chancellor Adam Habib for opening up the place and the colleagues here. And then we want to invite unfortunately, those of you online, you're going to have a glass of wine wherever you are. Those of you who are here, we're going to ask you to stay and have a glass of wine with us. I think it's South African wine, environmentally, sustainably produced. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night, everyone.